Hi guys, tonight we step quietly into one of the most difficult campaigns of the Second World War, the long and exhausting struggle in Burma. You'll hear the story not through the roar of battles, but through the eyes of a single British soldier walking step by step into the jungle. This is a tale of endless rain, of hunger and malaria, of marching through a green maze where the enemy was not only Japanese troops, but also the land itself. In these words, you'll feel the weight of survival and the quiet courage of a man who kept moving forward. His name was never written into history books, but tonight you will walk with him. Before we get started, if you enjoy exploring hidden corners of history at a slower pace, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. I'd love to connect with you there. The first thing you need to understand about Burma is that it was unlike any other battlefield in the war. Europe was full of villages, fields, and wide roads. North Africa was burning desert, but Burma was alive in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. The jungle swallowed everything. Trees grew so tall and thick that sunlight rarely touched the ground. Vines curled around branches like snakes. The air itself seemed to press down on you, heavy with humidity, until every breath felt like it was dragging water into your lungs. Our soldier, a young man from Manchester who had never left England before, could hardly believe that this was real. When he boarded the ship months earlier, he thought the war would mean open battlefields, soldiers in neat uniforms, maybe even the chance to be a hero. What he found instead was mud up to his knees, leeches that clung to his skin in silence, and the endless buzz of insects that made it impossible to sleep. The first march into the jungle was unforgettable. The unit was ordered to move supplies along a narrow trail that wound between hills. There were no real roads, only tracks carved out by elephants and villagers. Every step sank into wet earth, and men slipped often, sometimes falling with their rifles into the muck. The heat was crushing. It wasn't the dry heat of summer in England, but something heavier, something that seemed to smother you from all sides. Sweat never dried. Shirts stuck to skin. Boots rotted quickly, and the smell of damp leather followed them everywhere. At night, when they tried to rest, the jungle came alive with sounds. Owls screeched, monkeys howled in the distance, and insects droned endlessly. The soldier lay awake on his mat, staring into the darkness, listening to the rustle of leaves that might be a snake sliding past, or might be nothing at all. Sleep never came easily, and when it did, it was often broken by sudden rainstorms hammering down on the tin roofs of makeshift shelters. Food was another battle. The supply lines were long and fragile, and meals often meant little more than rice or hard biscuits. Sometimes the men were given tinned meat, but it spoiled quickly in the heat. Hunger became a constant companion. The soldier learned to chew slowly, to make every bite last, because he never knew when the next full meal might come. Water had to be boiled, but even then, it tasted of metal and smoke. Disease spread quickly. Within the first weeks, men collapsed from malaria, shivering with fever under thin blankets. Others developed dysentery and grew weak from dehydration. The jungle punished everyone equally, no matter how strong they had been back home. The soldier watched friends grow pale and thin, and sometimes they were carried back along the trail, unable to walk any further. It was in these first weeks that he realized the true meaning of endurance. The enemy had not even appeared yet, and already the jungle itself was testing whether they could survive. Each day was measured not in victories but in small successes, keeping your feet dry for a few hours, finding shade under a tree, sharing a cigarette with a friend at the end of a long march. These moments, small as they were, became treasures. The Japanese were out there, somewhere in the same green maze. The soldier had not yet seen them, but he felt their presence in every rustle, in every distant crack of branches. Scouts whispered that they were skilled at moving silently through the jungle, that they blended in with the shadows, and that they knew the land far better than the British ever could. The soldier tried not to think about it as he adjusted his helmet and wiped sweat from his brow, but the fear was always there, just under the surface. In those first days, what kept him going was not glory or duty, but the simple bond with the men around him. Each one was struggling in the same way, each one exhausted, each one longing for home. They shared stories quietly at night, about sweethearts, about pubs back in London, about mothers who sent letters with pressed flowers inside. These memories lit small sparks in the darkness, enough to push them into another day. And so, in the middle of that vast, unending jungle, the story of one British soldier's war began. The first clash with the land itself came sooner than with any enemy. The trail they followed grew steeper as it climbed into the Arakan hills, winding upward through dripping foliage and rocks slick with moss. The soldier could hear his own breath echoing in his helmet as he pushed one foot ahead of the other, the strap of his pack digging into his shoulder. The column stretched out behind him, men like silent shadows moving between trees. They had been marching for hours and the heat was unforgiving. When they finally halted at a clearing, the relief was short-lived. The clearing was little more than a patch of churned mud surrounded by bamboo thickets. Mosquitoes swarmed instantly, clouding around their faces, forcing them to wave their hands constantly as they tried to eat or drink. The soldier slapped at his neck and cursed under his breath, though his voice was weary rather than angry. He had never known such relentless pests. Some men wrapped scarves around their heads for protection, but the insects always found a way in. That night, they lit small fires, the smoke driving some of the mosquitoes away. The soldier sat cross-legged near the glow, listening as a corporal read aloud a letter from home. The voice was soft, almost tender, but the words only deepened the ache of distance. The letter spoke of rain falling on cobblestone streets in England, of a small pub closing early, of ordinary things that now felt like memories from another lifetime. The soldier closed his eyes and tried to picture those streets, but the jungle pressed in, loud with unseen creatures. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the sound of dripping water and sudden shouts from men who woke from fever dreams. By dawn, the camp smelled of damp earth and smoke. Their orders were clear: push deeper. The jungle seemed endless, and with each day the soldier realized how much it consumed. Boots wore thin, socks stayed wet, and skin broke down in sores. Yet there was no choice but to march. Supplies had to reach forward units, and the trail was their only lifeline. Along the way they passed small villages, bamboo huts on stilts above the mud. The villagers watched silently, children peeking from doorways. Some offered fruit or water, others simply stared, their faces unreadable. The soldier wondered what they thought of these foreign men trudging through their land, bringing a war that was never theirs to begin with. For the soldier, every step forward was an act of quiet endurance. He no longer thought of heroism. He thought of the next drink of water, the next rest stop, the next sunrise that meant one more day survived. And though the enemy had not yet shown himself, the jungle already felt like a battle that never ended. The soldier's first true taste of fear did not come from bullets, but from silence. After days of endless noise, buzzing insects, dripping water, the shuffle of boots, the jungle suddenly fell quiet one afternoon. The column had been moving along a narrow path cut through thick undergrowth, and the stillness spread like a signal. Birds no longer called. Even the monkeys, usually chattering in the treetops, seemed to vanish. The men felt it instantly. Their sergeant raised a hand, and the unit froze. The soldier gripped his rifle tighter, sweat trickling down his face, though not from the heat alone. Somewhere in that silence, hidden eyes were watching. The Japanese were known for ambushes. They studied the land with patience, blending into the trees, striking when least expected. The soldier's breath slowed, ears straining for any sign, every rustle now suspicious. Minutes dragged. The sergeant motioned them onward, step by cautious step. Each man placed his boots carefully, avoiding the snap of branches. The jungle seemed to hold its breath with them. When the first shot cracked, it was distant, echoing through the trees. Another followed, sharper, and suddenly the forest exploded with noise. Shouts, gunfire, the thunder of grenades somewhere ahead. The soldier dropped flat, heart pounding as bullets whipped through leaves overhead. He pressed his cheek to the mud, the earthy smell filling his lungs, and waited for orders. The sergeant's voice came, firm but calm, urging them to hold their ground. The soldier lifted his head just enough to see flashes of muzzle fire between trees, like lightning in a storm. Smoke drifted low, mixing with mist, turning the world into shifting shadows. He fired back when told, though the shapes he aimed at were ghosts more than men. The firefight did not last long, yet it felt endless. When it finally ebbed, the silence returned, heavier than before. Bodies were searched, ammunition counted, and the wounded carried to the rear. The soldier's hands trembled as he reloaded, but no one spoke of fear. It was simply accepted, part of the jungle's toll. That night, under a canopy of dripping leaves, the soldier sat with his comrades staring at the dim glow of a lantern. The jungle around them whispered again, life resuming as though nothing had happened. Yet for the soldier, something had changed. The war was no longer distant. It was here, in the shadows of the Burmese forest, and he realized that survival would depend not only on strength, but on silence, patience, and the will to keep walking into the unknown. The jungle became both enemy and shield. After the ambush, every movement forward was measured, every sound suspicious. The soldier learned to read the language of leaves, the sudden fall of a branch, the ripple of bushes, the unnatural silence before a storm of bullets. Yet he also realized that the same jungle that concealed their enemy could hide him too. Camouflage became instinct. Mud smeared across faces, leaves tucked into helmets, uniforms darkened with sweat and grime, until men seemed like moving parts of the forest itself. On long marches, he began to sense the rhythm of the land. The jungle had moods, restless during midday when insects screamed, calmer at dusk when the air cooled, eerie at night when fog rose from the ground. In those hours, the soldier felt closest to the heart of Burma, as though the land itself was testing whether they belonged. Supplies grew harder to move. Mules carried loads until they collapsed, and then men took over, straining under boxes of ammunition and food. Every pound felt heavier in the heat. The soldier's back ached constantly. His boots rubbed raw, yet he carried on. At night, when they set up small camps, he helped dig shallow trenches, barely wide enough for a man to lie in. Rain turned them into puddles, but it was all they had. Letters from home became lifelines. The soldier treasured every envelope, reading the same words again and again. His sister wrote of ration queues in Manchester, of neighbours helping one another, of blackout curtains drawn tight. The ordinary life described in those lines felt like another world. He tucked each letter carefully into his pack, safe from the damp, and pulled it out whenever despair pressed too close. The Japanese attacked again days later, striking like shadows. The firefight was short but vicious. Smoke clung to the trees, and when it cleared, men lay still in the mud. The soldier stared at one face he knew, now pale and unmoving, and felt the reality of war settle deeper. They buried the dead quickly, simple mounds of earth marked with helmets, before moving on. There was no time to grieve, yet at night, lying awake, he whispered the names of those lost, as though keeping them alive in memory. Through it all, a quiet bond grew stronger among the survivors. They shared cigarettes, whispered jokes, even silence together. Each man carried his own fear, but together they created a fragile shield of endurance. And as the soldier pushed deeper into Burma, he began to understand that this war was not only about fighting the enemy, it was about fighting despair itself. The monsoon arrived like a hammer, and the jungle transformed overnight. Rains fell without pause, drumming on helmets, turning trails into rivers of mud that swallowed boots to the ankle. The soldier soon discovered that staying dry was impossible. Clothes clung to skin, soaked through within minutes and never dried. Blankets became heavy rags, rifles slick with moisture. The air itself felt thicker, each breath damp, carrying the smell of rot. The monsoon did not come in showers but in walls of water, crashing down with a force that drowned all other sound. Men marched hunched forward, heads bowed, their world reduced to mud beneath and rain above. The soldier felt as though the sky itself had collapsed upon them. Days blurred together. Food became even scarcer, supply convoys slowed to a crawl, and meals shrank to handfuls of rice. Fires sputtered uselessly, smoke smothered by the downpour, so most rations were eaten cold. Leeches multiplied in the wet, sliding silently onto legs and arms, feeding until discovered, then dropping away to leave small streams of blood. The soldier learned to check constantly, brushing them off with a weary disgust that soon became routine. Sickness spread quickly. Men coughed through fever, others shivered uncontrollably, their skin hot yet clammy. Malaria struck again, and once strong soldiers could barely lift their rifles. The jungle seemed to conspire with the rain to weaken them before the enemy even appeared. Yet despite the misery, the march continued. Orders pressed them forward, deeper into the sodden land, along tracks that collapsed under their feet. Bridges of bamboo snapped, sending men and mules into torrents of brown water. Each crossing became an ordeal, each step a gamble against being swept away. At night, they huddled in trenches filling with water, their bodies stiff with exhaustion, unable to sleep for more than moments. Still, amid this misery, the soldier found small sparks of endurance. A comrade shared a dry match, miraculously protected, lighting a single cigarette that passed between hands. Another produced a tin of jam saved from home, its sweetness reminding them that the world beyond the rain still existed. In such moments, laughter even returned, brief but real, as though defying the monsoon itself. The soldier realized that survival meant more than endurance of the body. It meant clinging to fragments of humanity. As the monsoon roared on, he began to understand why veterans spoke of Burma not only as a battlefield, but as a test of spirit that never seemed to end. When the rains finally eased, the jungle did not become kinder. Instead, it grew heavier, steaming under the sun, releasing clouds of mist that clung to the skin. The soldier marched through paths that were now green tunnels, the air buzzing with insects, the ground slick with moss and mud. Rivers that had raged during the monsoon shrank but still had to be crossed, often by wading waist-deep through currents that carried leeches and unseen dangers. Boots squelched with every step, and the smell of decay was everywhere. Rotting leaves, abandoned food, even the bodies of mules that had collapsed along the way. Each day brought exhaustion, but the war pressed forward. Rumours spread through the ranks about Japanese patrols. Scouts reported movement in the hills, and the tension built until every shadow seemed a threat. The soldier found his senses sharpening. He began to notice the smallest details, the bend of grass, the silence of birds, the snap of a twig that might mean an enemy close by. Nights were the hardest. The jungle never slept, and neither did fear. Gunfire sometimes cracked in the distance, brief and sudden, leaving everyone awake and gripping their rifles until silence returned. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of home, only to vanish at the rustle of leaves nearby. The soldier often thought of his family, imagining their lives carrying on in faraway England, unaware of the green world that now defined his own. The enemy appeared again one morning, when the column reached a narrow ridge. Shots rang out from above, and men dived for cover among roots and rocks. The soldier pressed himself flat, the earth cool against his face, as bullets cut through branches overhead. The Japanese held the high ground, firing down with precision. The sergeant barked orders, and the men crawled forward, inch by inch, returning fire into the trees. Smoke rose, blending with the mist, and the battle became a blur of noise and flashes. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. When the firing finally ceased, the ridge was silent once more. The soldier's ears rang, his hands shook as he reloaded, but he was alive. Others were not so fortunate. They buried comrades quickly as always and moved on. That night the soldier sat in darkness, staring at the faint glow of a lantern. He realized that in Burma life was measured not by victories or losses, but by the simple fact of surviving another day. and with each dawn, survival itself became the only victory that mattered. The longer the soldier stayed in Burma, the more the jungle seemed to seep into his bones. Time lost its meaning. Days were counted not by calendars, but by the rhythm of marching, setting camp, and marching again. The sun rose heavy and fell quickly, swallowed by sudden night, leaving only the glow of small fires flickering beneath trees. The soldier began to feel that the outside world, Manchester streets, his sister's letters, the pubs he once knew, was part of another lifetime. Here, the war created its own world, bounded by vines, rivers, and mountains. The jungle became his horizon. Patrols were constant. The unit was ordered to sweep through valleys and ridges searching for enemy camps. The soldier learned how to move silently, crouching low, stepping carefully to avoid snapping branches. The jungle taught patience. Sometimes hours passed without a sound, the only company the hum of insects and the slow drip of water. Then, suddenly, a shout or a shot would tear the silence apart, and the patrol scattered into cover, weapons ready. On one such patrol they found the remains of a skirmish, discarded helmets, spent cartridges, and abandoned gear. The sight chilled the soldier. The war was close, closer than the silence suggested. He felt eyes on them even when none were seen, and the thought followed him back to camp like a shadow. In camp, life was stripped down to essentials: food, water, shelter, and the strength to carry on. The soldier grew thinner, his uniform hanging loose, his face lined with exhaustion. Yet he also grew harder, his body adapting, his mind learning to endure. Nights brought brief moments of peace. Around small fires, men told quiet stories, some humorous, some wistful, some about nothing at all. Laughter, when it came, felt like rebellion against the jungle. The soldier valued these moments more than he could say. They reminded him that he was still human, not just a figure lost in endless green. Letters from home remained precious. Each envelope was read until the words wore thin. They were anchors, proof that beyond this place life went on. Yet even as he read, the soldier felt himself changing. He was no longer the young man who boarded a ship dreaming of heroism. He was something else now, forged by rain, hunger, and silence. In Burma, he learned that courage was not loud or glorious. It was the quiet act of standing up each morning, lifting a heavy pack, and walking again into the unknown. The soldier's unit was soon ordered to support a push deeper into the hills, where Japanese forces were believed to be entrenched. The march took them through valleys filled with mist so thick it felt like walking inside a cloud. Trees loomed like shadows, dripping water constantly, while narrow trails wound along cliffs that dropped into unseen depths. Every step was cautious, every sound magnified. The soldier kept his rifle close, his eyes scanning the foliage, though most of the time he saw only endless green. They moved slowly, halting often to listen. Scouts whispered of enemy movements, though sightings were rare. This uncertainty gnawed at the men. Waiting for an attack was often worse than the attack itself. When it finally came, it was sudden and sharp. Gunfire erupted from the ridge above, and the column scattered for cover. The soldier threw himself into a ditch, mud splashing across his face. Bullets tore through leaves overhead, and he fired back blindly, trusting his sergeant's commands more than his own judgment. The fight lasted only minutes, but when it ended, 2 of their own lay dead and several wounded. The Japanese vanished back into the jungle, leaving silence behind. It was a pattern the soldier would come to know well. Sudden ambush, quick retreat, the jungle swallowing everything again. The aftermath weighed heavily. They carried the wounded on improvised stretchers, stumbling over roots and rocks, sweat pouring down their faces. The soldier's arms burned with the effort, yet he refused to let go. In moments like these, survival was not just about one man, it was about the bond of all. That night, rain returned, soft but steady, pattering on leaves above. The soldier sat under a poncho, staring at the flicker of a small fire. He thought about the men lost, their names already becoming whispers in the damp air. It struck him how quickly lives vanished here, how easily the jungle erased traces of struggle. Yet he also felt a strange clarity, that what kept him moving was not orders from faraway generals, but the faces beside him, the shared burden of each day. The jungle war was fought in moments unseen by history, in quiet endurance, in carrying a friend one more mile, in whispering a joke at night to push away the darkness. The soldier realized this was the truth of Burma, not glory, but survival, and the stubborn will to keep walking forward. Weeks in the jungle began to feel like months. The soldier marked time only by the fading of letters in his pack and the wear on his boots. His body had changed, leaner, tougher, his skin darkened by sun and scarred by insect bites. Hunger became constant, a dull ache that never left. Rice was the staple, sometimes mixed with a bit of tinned meat if supplies reached them in time. More often, it was just plain, eaten quickly in silence before another march. Yet even with so little, men found ways to share. A soldier with a tin of condensed milk split it among 5 others, each man taking a spoonful as though it were treasure. Small kindnesses carried them further than food itself. Marches grew longer. Orders took them across swollen rivers where bamboo bridges bent under their weight. The soldier remembered wading chest-deep through water, his rifle held overhead, the current threatening to sweep him off his feet. On the far bank, soaked and trembling, he felt strangely grateful simply to have made it across. Fear became a constant companion, but not always from the enemy. Malaria struck again and again. Men who seemed strong one day collapsed the next, burning with fever, eyes glazed. The soldier helped carry stretchers through miles of mud, each stumble threatening to spill them. Medicine was scarce, quinine rationed carefully, and not all survived. The jungle took lives as efficiently as bullets. Still, there were moments when the soldier felt a strange beauty in the land. Dawn often came with mist curling through the trees, birds calling from unseen branches, light spilling across green valleys. For a few minutes, before the heat rose, the jungle seemed almost peaceful, as though untouched by war. The soldier would breathe deeply, letting the air fill his lungs before reality returned. On patrol, they sometimes found villages abandoned, bamboo huts standing empty, cooking pots left behind. The silence was unsettling, as if the jungle had reclaimed human spaces. Other times, villagers remained, watching quietly as the column passed. Some offered fruit or water, their faces unreadable. The soldier wondered what they thought of foreign men with rifles trudging through their homeland, leaving only footprints in the mud. Nights brought reflection. The soldier lay awake under dripping leaves, listening to the steady breathing of comrades around him. He thought of home, of the life he once imagined, and of how different he had become. Burma was reshaping him, not into a hero, but into someone who understood that endurance was the true measure of war. By the time autumn came, the soldier no longer thought of seasons the way he once had. In England, autumn meant cool air, leaves turning gold, the smell of coal fires. In Burma it meant more rain, thicker mud, and a deeper fatigue that clung to every man. Yet it also meant that their campaign pressed further north, into terrain even harsher than before. Orders came suddenly, carried by officers who looked as weary as the men they led. Push on toward the mountains, secure the ridges, hold the line, and so they marched again. The soldier felt his legs move almost by habit, his body carrying him forward even when his mind drifted elsewhere. He thought of his mother's kitchen, of bread baking, of the ordinary comfort of warmth. Such memories struck like waves, sudden and strong, only to fade as he stumbled over roots and stones. The Japanese struck once more along a jungle trail, firing from hidden foxholes. The soldier dropped instantly, returning fire into shadows. Grenades shook the ground, smoke rising in thick columns. The fight was brutal, fast, and left the trail littered with broken gear. The soldier crouched low, his ears ringing, the air thick with cordite. When it was over, he looked around at faces as pale as his own. They did not cheer. They simply gathered their wounded and moved forward. Silence heavier than words. At night, the camp was a collection of wet blankets and tired bodies. Men spoke in whispers, if at all, their voices low so as not to disturb the fragile calm. The soldier sat with one comrade sharing a single cigarette. The glow lit their faces for a moment before fading into darkness. They spoke of home, but without joy. It was more like reciting a memory, keeping it alive even as distance grew. Yet amid despair, there was resilience. Each day they rose, shouldered packs, and marched again. The soldier noticed how routines became survival. Cleaning rifles, drying socks by the fire, boiling water. All small acts that gave structure in a world where chaos ruled. He learned that endurance was not grand, but built on repetition, on doing the same small things over and over until they became anchors. Still, exhaustion never left. His body felt older, his spirit heavy, yet he kept walking. In Burma, survival was not about strength or bravery. It was about the will to continue when every part of you wanted to stop. And that, the soldier realized, was the quiet truth of war in the jungle. The soldier soon found that the mountains of Burma were no less unforgiving than the jungle below. Trails wound upward in endless switchbacks, narrow and treacherous, often little more than ledges cut into the rock. One misstep meant a fall into mist-filled valleys. The climb tested lungs and legs already worn thin by months of marching. Packs dug deeper into shoulders, rifles felt twice as heavy, and every breath came sharp in the thinning air. Yet onward they went, urged by orders and by the knowledge that the ridges held strategic value. Holding them meant supply lines could continue, meant other units could advance. At the top of one ridge they found not relief, but another battle. The Japanese were dug in, bunkers concealed by foliage, firing down as the British approached. The soldier hugged the earth, crawling forward inch by inch, the world exploding with fire and noise. The fight raged for hours. Smoke clung to the slopes. Grenades echoed off rock walls and shouts mixed with the rattle of machine guns. The soldier fired until his shoulder ached, reloaded, and fired again. When the ridge was finally taken, bodies lay scattered across the ground, friend and foe alike. Victory brought no joy, only exhaustion. They dug shallow graves for their comrades, marking them with helmets, before pushing forward once more. Nights on the ridges were cold, a different kind of misery than the steaming jungle. The soldier shivered beneath his thin blanket, teeth chattering as wind swept over the peaks. He longed for warmth, for shelter, but there was none. Fires risked giving away positions, so most nights they endured the dark, curled against the ground. Hunger grew sharper too. Supplies reached them slowly, carried up narrow paths by mules or men, often under fire. Meals were smaller than ever, sometimes only a handful of rice. The soldier chewed carefully, stretching each bite, his stomach protesting the emptiness. Still, he forced himself to focus on the simple fact of survival. Letters from home arrived rarely now, but when they did, they were treasures. He read them under the faint light of dawn, the words carrying him for days afterward. His sister's handwriting, slightly smudged from travel, spoke of ration books, neighbours, the changing seasons in England. To the soldier, it felt like a whisper from another life, one he fought to remember. In Burma's mountains, war was measured not by territory gained, but by the number of men still standing at the end of each day. And every morning, when the soldier rose to march again, he counted himself among the fortunate. The mountains brought a new kind of silence. At night the soldier listened not to the buzzing insects of the jungle, but to the moan of wind as it swept through valleys. The stars appeared brighter here, sharp against the black sky, though clouds often rolled in quickly, blotting them out. The soldier sometimes stared upward, feeling both comforted and unsettled. Those same stars shone over England, where his family lived their quiet routines. Yet here, under their light, he was half a world away, crouched in the mud of a foreign ridge. Patrols along the high ground were relentless. The enemy had not given up. Japanese snipers hid among rocks and trees, firing without warning. Each patrol became a test of nerves, every shadow a possible threat. The soldier learned to move carefully, his eyes scanning constantly, his body tense with anticipation. Fear never fully left, but it became a companion he carried like his rifle. One afternoon the unit stumbled upon a small clearing where abandoned enemy gear lay scattered. Helmets, cooking pots, a torn flag. The sight was haunting. It told a story of men who had lived, eaten, and perhaps died here only days before. The soldier picked up a canteen, still half full, and felt a strange pang of recognition. Their enemies were not faceless after all. They endured the same hunger, the same exhaustion. That realization settled heavily on him as they moved on. The strain of the campaign showed on every man. Faces grew hollow, eyes sunken, beards ragged. Clothes hung loose, boots patched again and again. Yet despite their condition, there was resilience in their movements. Each day they rose, shouldered burdens and pressed forward. The soldier realized that war had reshaped them all, carving away softness, leaving only determination. At camp he sometimes wrote in a small notebook, though pages grew damp and ink smudged. He recorded fragments, how the mist looked at dawn, how a comrade laughed at a poor joke, how silence felt heavier than noise. These notes were his way of holding on to something beyond orders and battles. They reminded him that he was more than a soldier, that he was still a man who could observe, remember, and hope. As weeks stretched on, the ridge became another marker in a journey without end. Victories were temporary, ground won today could be lost tomorrow, but survival carried its own weight. The soldier understood now that Burma's war was not about triumphs, but about enduring the unendurable, and still rising each morning to face another day. The campaign dragged into another long stretch, and the soldier began to feel that Burma was a world without end. Every ridge they climbed revealed another behind it. Every valley opened into yet another tangle of green. The war seemed less like a series of battles, and more like an endless march against exhaustion itself. The soldier's body had adapted to the rhythm, but his mind often drifted. He found himself thinking in fragments, recalling pieces of home in sudden flashes, the smell of rain on cobblestones, the sound of church bells, the laughter of neighbours. These memories came uninvited, striking hardest during the quiet moments when the jungle held still. Yet he clung to them, for they reminded him of why he endured. Supplies remained scarce. Convoys struggled along treacherous trails, often ambushed or swallowed by landslides. Rations grew smaller, meals sometimes little more than a handful of rice or biscuits softened in water. The soldier lost weight steadily, his uniform hanging loose, his belt tightened notch by notch. Still, he marched. Hunger was a constant, but so was duty. The Japanese struck again near a mountain stream. The attack was sudden, rifles cracking from the tree line. The soldier dropped low, returning fire into shadows. Water splashed around him as bullets struck the surface, sending sprays into the air. The firefight raged for what felt like hours, though in truth it was brief. When it ended, the stream ran red in places, its calm flow disturbed by the violence. The soldier stared at the water afterward, unsettled by how quickly nature swallowed evidence of death. That night the men built their camp nearby, too weary to push on. The soldier sat by the stream, listening to its quiet rush, and felt an odd mix of sorrow and calm. Life and death seemed to flow together here, inseparable, like the endless currents of the river itself. In the days that followed, sickness struck again. Malaria, dysentery, fevers of unknown cause. Each man feared the moment his body might betray him. The soldier helped carry comrades too weak to walk, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. The jungle cared nothing for strength or rank. It claimed all equally. Yet even in such darkness, sparks of humanity remained. A song hummed softly at night, a joke whispered during a march, a hand reaching to steady another man crossing a log bridge. The soldier realized that these gestures mattered as much as bullets or orders. They were proof that, even here, men could still be more than shadows in the green. And so he pressed on, one step at a time, determined to endure whatever Burma placed before him. The longer the campaign stretched, the more the soldier realized how invisible their struggle seemed. News from home arrived rarely, and when it did, it spoke of Europe, of battles in France, of the bombing of London, of the push toward Germany. Burma was mentioned little, if at all. The soldier read such lines with a mixture of pride and bitterness. He knew the war in Europe was fierce, yet here, in this forgotten corner of the world, men were enduring trials no less severe. The jungle did not care whether history remembered them. It only demanded strength, patience, and sacrifice. Marching continued without end. The soldier's legs moved from habit now, his mind sometimes drifting into a haze where hours slipped past unnoticed. He remembered little of certain days, only flashes, the call of a bird, the sting of sweat in his eyes, the weight of his pack grinding into his back. Time became fluid, one day flowing into the next, until the war felt eternal. Yet dangers were never far. Snipers haunted ridges, landmines waited on trails, and ambushes erupted without warning. Each shot fired reminded the soldier that survival was never guaranteed. He learned to live moment by moment, never planning beyond the next sunrise. At camp, men grew quieter. Conversation dwindled to whispers, laughter rare and fleeting. Many carried sickness silently, unwilling to slow the group. The soldier watched comrades cough into rags, their eyes fever-bright, yet still they rose each morning to march again. Such resilience humbled him. One evening, as mist settled over a valley, the soldier wrote a few lines in his damp notebook. "We're not fighting for medals, we're fighting for tomorrow." He stared at the words, smudged by rain, and felt their truth. Heroism here was not about glory, but about endurance, the will to rise, shoulder burdens, and walk again. Despite despair, there were glimpses of beauty. Sunsets painted the sky in deep orange, rivers shimmered under moonlight, and the jungle sometimes seemed almost gentle in its vastness. These moments reminded the soldier that life still existed beyond war. They were fragile, fleeting, but precious. He stored them in memory, like treasures carried beside his rifle. And as the campaign dragged on, he understood that the jungle war would never truly be remembered for victories or defeats. It would be remembered, if at all, as the quiet endurance of men who refused to surrender to despair. The soldier's memories of home began to blur as the campaign went on. What once felt sharp, his mother's voice, the sound of church bells, the taste of bread, now seemed distant, like echoes fading through fog. In their place came sharper images of the jungle, the green weight of vines, the smell of damp earth, the endless rhythm of boots in mud. Burma was becoming his world, a world that consumed thought and memory. Each dawn began with the same ritual. Orders passed quietly through camp. Men rose stiffly from the ground, rifles slung, packs adjusted. The soldier no longer questioned the routine. It was survival through repetition. Step after step, hour after hour, the march carried them deeper into terrain where the line between progress and futility blurred. Ambushes remained a constant threat. The Japanese struck like shadows, appearing suddenly, firing with deadly precision, then vanishing back into the trees. Each clash left the soldier shaken but alive, his heart pounding, his rifle trembling in his hands. He stopped counting battles. They merged into one long struggle, defined not by victories but by the fact that he was still standing at day's end. Illness gnawed at the unit. Malaria returned, fevers spiking, men shivering under blankets though the air was hot. Dysentery spread, leaving soldiers too weak to carry their packs. The soldier often helped lift stretchers, sweat pouring as he stumbled forward with another man's weight across his shoulders. Death came quietly, sometimes in the night, sometimes mid-march when a comrade simply collapsed and did not rise again. Burials were quick, marked with helmets or sticks, the jungle reclaiming ground within hours. Yet through loss, bonds deepened. The soldier found strength not in orders from officers, but in the presence of those beside him. A shared glance during a march, a hand steadying another over slippery rocks, a whispered joke when silence grew too heavy. These were the anchors that held them. One evening, as rain softened into mist, the soldier sat near a small fire with two comrades. They spoke of nothing grand, only of food, meals they missed, flavours they longed for, bread with butter, potatoes roasted, tea steaming in cups. Their voices carried warmth, and for a moment the jungle seemed far away. The soldier realised then that memory itself was a form of survival. To recall what was lost was to remind themselves that life existed beyond mud and fear. And so, even in the heart of Burma, they carried fragments of home, fragile yet powerful, guiding them forward through another day. The campaign moved steadily northward, deeper into jungle valleys where rivers cut through the land like veins. Crossing them was always an ordeal. Sometimes engineers built shaky bamboo bridges, swaying under the weight of men and mules. Other times they had no choice but to wade through waist-deep currents, rifles held high, packs dragging them downward. The soldier remembered the chill of water mixed with fear of what lurked beneath. Snakes, leeches, unseen dangers that belonged to this land. Each crossing left men soaked, boots squelching, socks heavy, blisters forming anew. Still, there was no pause. Orders demanded progress, and progress meant suffering. Along the way, they passed abandoned villages, huts leaning in silence, cooking fires long cold. The sight unsettled the soldier more than empty jungle. These were homes once filled with voices, laughter, and daily life, now surrendered to vines and creeping moss. He wondered where the families had gone, and whether war had chased them into the forests. Sometimes villagers remained, watching cautiously as the column passed. Some offered fruit or water, gifts accepted with gratitude. Others looked on in silence, their faces unreadable. The soldier sensed a quiet weight in their eyes, as though they had seen too much of armies and war. Skirmishes broke out again and again, sudden and violent. One patrol ended with gunfire exploding from hidden trenches. The soldier fired back until his rifle grew hot, the air thick with smoke and shouted orders. When the clash ended, the ground was littered with helmets, packs, and still bodies. He stared at a fallen comrade, someone he had spoken to only hours earlier, and felt the familiar hollowness settle in. Burials followed quickly, earth mounded over, rifles leaned in silence as markers. At night, the soldier sat with weary men under dripping branches. They spoke less now, silence filling the spaces where conversation once lived. The war had stripped them down, carving away comfort until only endurance remained. Yet even then, small sparks flickered. A soldier pulled out a harmonica, playing a thin tune that floated over the camp. Another shared a scrap of chocolate saved from home. The soldier listened, tasted, and for a moment felt almost human again. In those fragile moments, he understood that survival was not just about strength, but about remembering who they were. Burma sought to erase them, to grind them into mud and silence, but each laugh, each note of music, each act of kindness pushed back against the weight of despair. The soldier learned that time in Burma was measured less by days than by distances endured. 10 miles on a map could mean an entire week of struggle, each mile clawed from jungle and mud. The unit pressed forward, step after step through valleys where the air hung heavy and hills that seemed endless. Their world shrank to the rhythm of boots, the weight of packs, the sting of sweat in their eyes. To march was to survive, to stop was to fall behind. The Japanese rarely confronted them in open battle. Instead, they haunted the land like phantoms. A single shot from the tree line, then silence. A tripwire hidden on a trail, a burst of fire from a concealed pit. Each ambush lasted only minutes, but the tension lingered for hours. The soldier grew used to gripping his rifle tighter whenever the jungle fell too quiet. Fear never left. It simply became a thread woven into every breath. Illness was no less dangerous. Malaria returned in waves, fevers striking without warning. Men who seemed strong in the morning lay shivering by nightfall, eyes glazed, lips cracked with thirst. The soldier helped carry them when he could, though his own body ached with fatigue. Medicine was scarce, quinine rationed sparingly. Not all survived. Graves multiplied along the trail, marked quickly with sticks or helmets, soon swallowed by vines. The soldier sometimes whispered the names of the fallen under his breath as he walked, unwilling to let them vanish completely. Yet even amid loss, life insisted on flickering through. One evening, as camp settled into weary silence, a soldier began humming a tune. Another joined, then another, until the air filled with a thin but steady chorus. The soldier listened, his heart easing for the first time in weeks. The melody carried him back to streets of home, to voices of friends long distant. It was fragile, imperfect, but it reminded them all that they were still more than shadows in the jungle. Letters from home arrived rarely now, but when they did, they were passed from hand to hand, voices reading aloud for those who could not receive their own. The soldier heard news of England, ration lines, air raids, neighbours lending each other what little they had. It comforted him to know that his struggle was not entirely forgotten. As night fell and rain began again, he curled under his blanket, listening to the rhythm of drops on leaves. Tomorrow would bring more marching, more fear, perhaps more loss. But tonight, with the sound of rain and faint memory of song, he found enough strength to close his eyes and rest. The soldier discovered that the jungle never truly gave rest. Even when camp was set, even when rifles were stacked and fires flickered, the land itself seemed intent on keeping men awake. Insects buzzed endlessly, leeches crept silently, and sudden cries from unseen animals pierced the night. Sleep came in fragments, shallow and uncertain. The soldier often woke with a start, convinced he had heard footsteps in the dark. Sometimes it was nothing. Other times it was real. Enemy scouts probing the edges of their perimeter, slipping back into the shadows before dawn. Guard duty became a torment. Hours passed slowly, each second stretched thin as the soldier strained to listen for sounds beyond the rain. His rifle felt heavier as the night deepened, his eyes burning with exhaustion. Yet he never allowed himself to close them. A single lapse could mean disaster. He learned to mark time by small things: the dim glow of a cigarette ember, the rustle of a comrade shifting in sleep, the first pale light of dawn filtering through leaves. The routine of survival pressed on. Each day was a cycle of march, fight, eat, rest, march again. It wore down the body and dulled the mind. The soldier sometimes wondered if he had become a machine, moving forward because there was no other option. Yet moments of humanity still broke through. A comrade shared a story about his wedding day, told in whispers under the rain. Another pulled out a worn photograph of children he had not seen in years. The soldier listened, watched, and realized that each man carried a private world far from Burma, hidden in memory but alive in spirit. Battles continued to flare. One ambush left the soldier scrambling for cover as grenades tore through the jungle floor. He fired until his hands shook, his ears ringing, smoke stinging his eyes. When silence returned, the ground was littered with shattered branches and wounded cries. They carried their injured away, patched wounds with what supplies remained, and marched on. No one spoke of victory. It was survival, nothing more. That night the soldier sat beside a dying fire, watching sparks drift upward into darkness. He thought of how war had stripped everything away: comfort, safety, even time itself. Yet what remained was endurance, the will to wake each day and keep moving. Burma offered no promises, no clear end, but still he pressed forward. In that quiet determination, he found the only kind of strength the jungle could not take. The soldier realized that Burma was not only a place of battles, but a place of waiting. Days stretched endlessly between clashes, filled with marches that seemed to lead nowhere. The jungle wrapped around them, a green wall that closed tighter the deeper they went. Each step forward felt like pushing against something invisible yet heavy, as though the land itself resisted them. The soldier often wondered whether they were moving toward victory or simply circling inside an endless maze. The monotony was broken only by sudden bursts of violence, an ambush here, a sniper's crack there, the sudden thunder of mortars dropping from unseen hills. Each clash ended quickly, leaving silence even heavier than before. Afterward, the men carried their wounded, buried their dead, and resumed the march. The war gave no pause for grief. Hunger bit harder now. Rations dwindled, supply lines stretched thin. The soldier sometimes chewed on unripe fruit taken from trees, his stomach rebelling but his hunger demanding it. He grew lean, his ribs visible beneath his shirt, yet he pushed on. Water was scarce in some stretches, forcing them to boil what they found in muddy pools. The taste was foul, metallic, but it kept them alive. Sickness shadowed every step. Malaria swept through the unit again, leaving men shivering in blankets, teeth chattering though the air was hot. Others grew weak from dysentery, their faces pale, their movements slow. The soldier feared the moment illness might claim him, but he forced himself to march, to eat what he could, to drink, to endure. At night he sometimes wrote in his damp notebook, pages smudged but still legible. He recorded fragments, the call of birds at dawn, the way mist curled along the ridges, the silence after a firefight. These details reminded him that he was still alive, still able to see and feel beyond the weight of war. Comrades shared small comforts: a piece of chocolate, a dry pair of socks, a whispered joke under rain-soaked trees. The soldier realized that survival was stitched together by such moments. They were fragile, fleeting, yet powerful enough to carry men through another day. He thought often of home, though the memories grew distant. His mother's voice, the smell of bread, the warmth of a fire, all felt like dreams now. Burma had replaced them with new images: mud, rain, smoke, the faces of comrades who endured beside him. And yet, even in that harshness, he carried hope. Not of glory, not of medals, but of simply living to see another sunrise. That, he knew, was the true victory here. The campaign pressed onward, and the soldier felt as though each mile took more from him than the last. His body was lean, his uniform ragged, his boots patched so often they barely held together. Yet he kept walking, step after step, because to stop was to surrender to the jungle, and surrender meant death. The land seemed endless, ridges folding into valleys, valleys into rivers, rivers into swamps. Each new stretch brought its own trials, and the soldier began to feel that Burma itself was the enemy, as relentless as any army. The Japanese remained close, though rarely seen. Sometimes they struck with sudden ferocity, then melted back into the trees. Other times their presence was felt only in the silence. Footprints on a trail, smoke drifting faintly in the distance, the echo of voices carried by wind. This constant uncertainty gnawed at the soldier more than combat itself. He learned to live with nerves stretched thin, his senses sharpened until even the rustle of a bird could set his heart racing. Illness spread once more. A comrade beside him collapsed mid-march, fever burning through him. The soldier helped carry him, shoulders aching under the stretcher's weight, knowing all the while that the man might not live to see another dawn. Too often, He did not. Graves dotted their path, swallowed quickly by vines and rain. The soldier whispered names at night, unwilling to let memory vanish as swiftly as the jungle erased their presence. Yet amid despair, there were moments of strange beauty. One evening, after days of rain, the sky cleared. The sunset painted the horizon in deep gold and crimson, the light reflecting off wet leaves until the jungle seemed aflame. The soldier paused, staring, his breath caught. For a few minutes the war receded, and he felt only awe at the vastness of the world around him. He stored that image carefully, a treasure to carry when darkness closed in again. Letters from home grew fewer, but when they came, they were read aloud in whispers, passed from hand to hand like sacred texts. The soldier clung to each word, each phrase, as though they were proof that another life still waited across oceans. Without them, he feared he might forget entirely who he had been before Burma. At camp, men grew quieter, conversation replaced by weary silence. Yet small acts still mattered. A shared cigarette, a joke murmured in the dark, a steady hand pulling another from a flooded ditch. These gestures bound them together. The soldier knew now that this bond was what kept them alive. Orders and strategy mattered little compared to the human will to endure, to rise each morning and face what lay ahead. And so he marched on, weary but unbroken, through a land that seemed determined to swallow him whole. The soldier no longer thought of the war as something that would end soon. Instead, it felt like a condition of life, a rhythm of survival that stretched endlessly ahead. Each morning he woke stiff and sore, his body aching from the march before, and yet he rose because all the others did. Habit carried him where strength could not. The jungle had become a world of repetition, mud, rain, sweat, fear, and within that pattern, the soldier learned to value the smallest breaks from routine. A dry patch of ground to sleep on, a cup of tea brewed miraculously over a fire, a moment of laughter at an old story, all became precious treasures. Skirmishes with the enemy continued like echoes. A sudden burst of fire from the trees, a grenade tossed onto the trail, the rush of shouting men. Each clash was fierce but brief, over before the mind could fully grasp it. Afterward came silence, broken only by the cries of the wounded. The soldier grew used to moving immediately after, carrying stretchers, collecting rifles, filling shallow graves. The cycle repeated until death itself felt less like an exception, and more like an inevitable presence walking beside them. Malaria and dysentery claimed as many men as bullets. Fever struck without warning, burning through strong bodies in hours. The soldier feared that moment for himself every day. He forced water down, swallowed bitter quinine when available, and kept moving even when exhaustion clawed at his limbs. He knew that to lie down too long was to risk never rising again. Still, amid despair, there were glimpses of resilience. One night, as rain hammered down, a comrade pulled out a battered deck of cards. By lantern light several men gathered, playing quietly while the storm raged outside their shelter. The soldier joined, and for an hour they forgot the mud, the hunger, the fear. The sound of laughter mingled with thunder, fragile but real. In those moments, he saw the strength of the human spirit, the refusal to let war erase every trace of joy. Letters from home remained his anchor. Though fewer now, each one was read until the paper softened, the ink fading under constant touch. They spoke of ordinary things, neighbours' gossip, harvests, ration lines. Yet to the soldier, they were proof that life still existed beyond this green prison. He read them by the glow of fire his heart carried briefly across oceans. As dawn broke, he folded them away, shouldered his rifle and marched once more. The jungle war demanded only one thing: endurance. And endurance, he realized, was not found in grand victories, but in the quiet decision to take another step when everything in him begged to stop. The soldier's sense of time had almost dissolved. Weeks blended into months, and he could no longer remember how many ridges they had crossed or how many valleys lay behind them. His notebook, though damp and smudged, became the only way to track the passing of days. He wrote short entries when he could, a note about a comrade's joke, a description of a sunrise, the number of miles they had marched. These fragments anchored him, reminders that he was still more than a body moving endlessly forward. The war in Burma was not like the great offensives he had imagined. There were no grand charges, no sweeping movements across wide fields. Instead, it was attrition, step by step, hill by hill, fought in silence and shadows. The Japanese fought with patience, striking suddenly and vanishing, leaving fear behind like a trail. The soldier knew that fear well. It lived in his stomach, tightened his throat, kept him awake at night. But he also knew that fear could be endured, just as hunger, rain, and sickness were endured. Each day survived was a small victory. The jungle itself never relented. Trails collapsed under mudslides. Rivers swelled without warning. Insects swarmed in relentless clouds. Boots rotted. Uniforms clung damp and heavy. Skin broke down in sores. Yet men pressed forward, driven less by orders than by the will not to fail one another. The soldier often thought of comrades as brothers, bound by something deeper than blood. Together they carried stretchers, shared food, whispered encouragement when strength faltered. In that bond lay the only certainty they had. One evening, as camp settled under heavy clouds, the soldier sat with a comrade who pulled a photograph from his pocket. It showed a family, 2 children, a wife, smiling faintly. The man stared at it for a long time before passing it to the soldier. Looking at that picture, the soldier felt a pang of longing so strong it hurt. He had no photograph of his own, only memories, but in that moment he shared the weight of another man's love and absence. Rain began soon after, drumming on leaves, but the fire they had coaxed to life burned steadily, defiant against the storm. They sat in silence, staring at the flames, each man lost in thought yet comforted by the presence of the other. The soldier realized that war could strip away comfort, health, and certainty, but it could not strip away the human heart. As long as men remembered why they endured, as long as they could still share a flame, a joke, or a photograph, Burma could not fully claim them. The soldier learned that every new day in Burma carried its own trial. Some days it was the march itself, 10 miles of sucking mud, leeches clinging to skin, packs cutting into shoulders until muscles burned. Other days it was the sudden crack of rifle fire from unseen positions, the rush to dive for cover, the confusion of smoke and shouts. And sometimes the hardest days brought no fighting at all, only the weight of waiting, the endless silence that pressed on nerves until even the rustle of a leaf could trigger fear. Waiting became its own battle. Patrols set out at dawn, moving slowly through the trees, senses sharpened to breaking point. Hours passed without contact, but no one relaxed. The jungle concealed everything, friend, foe, danger, or nothing at all. The soldier felt as though the land itself was alive, watching, testing. He walked with every muscle taut, his eyes scanning constantly, his breath shallow in the thick air. By nightfall, when they returned to camp, exhaustion was deeper than after a firefight. Fear consumed as much energy as marching. Food remained scarce. Supplies trickled in slowly, often under attack along the way. Rations were cut again, leaving men thinner, cheeks hollow, eyes dark with fatigue. The soldier sometimes dreamed of meals he once took for granted. Bread with butter, roasted potatoes, warm tea. These visions haunted him more than dreams of combat. Hunger gnawed without mercy. Sickness was constant too. The soldier helped tend to comrades burning with fever, their bodies trembling under soaked blankets. Some recovered, others did not. Death was quiet here, creeping rather than striking, but just as final. The soldier whispered prayers for them. Though he was not a deeply religious man, it felt important to say something, to resist the silence that followed each loss. Yet amid hardship, small lights endured. One evening, a comrade pulled out a harmonica, its notes thin but clear in the damp air. The tune carried across camp, soft yet powerful, reminding them all of places beyond Burma. The soldier closed his eyes and let the music wash over him, his heart lighter for those few minutes. He realized then that resilience was built not on strength alone, but on these fragile sparks of humanity. The jungle could strip away much, but it could not take everything. As dawn came the next morning, heavy with mist, the soldier rose once more. His body ached, his stomach growled, but he lifted his pack and marched again. In Burma, survival was not a choice. It was a duty, to himself, to his comrades, and to the memory of those already lost. The soldier grew used to the strange rhythm of war in Burma. Long stretches of marching and waiting, broken suddenly by moments of chaos. One afternoon, while moving through a valley thick with bamboo, the silence shattered with gunfire. Bullets ripped through leaves, splinters flying, men diving for cover in the mud. The soldier dropped instantly, pressing himself against the ground as shouts filled the air. Smoke from grenades mingled with the mist, turning the world into a blur of shadows. He fired into the trees, heart pounding, barely aware of his own voice as he shouted warnings to comrades. The firefight ended as quickly as it began. When the echoes faded, the jungle returned to silence as if nothing had happened. Yet the ground was littered with bodies and gear, and stretcher bearers moved among the fallen. The soldier helped lift one man, blood staining his hands. He tried not to look at the face, tried not to think of how only hours earlier that man had been laughing at a story by the fire. Such thoughts weighed heavily, but there was no time to dwell. Orders came to move on, and so they did. At night the soldier sat apart from the others, staring at the glow of a lantern. He thought of how war in Burma erased men quickly, as though the jungle itself swallowed them. Graves disappeared under vines within days, and memories blurred with exhaustion. He feared that even their names would fade, lost in silence. To resist that erasure, he wrote again in his notebook, scrawling lines about the ambush, about the faces of those lost. He told himself that as long as words remained, they would not be forgotten. Food shortages deepened. Rations shrank to handfuls of rice, sometimes nothing more than dry biscuits. Hunger made men irritable, tempers flaring over scraps. Yet they still shared, dividing what little they had so no one went without. The soldier realized that generosity mattered more than the food itself. It was a statement: we endure together, or not at all. Sickness pressed on too. Malaria returned with vengeance, fevers burning through camp, men trembling in damp blankets. Medicine was limited, and many suffered for weeks. The soldier feared each mosquito bite, knowing it might carry more danger than bullets, and yet, through it all, sparks of humanity endured. A comrade sang softly one night, his voice thin but steady. Others joined, humming along, their voices blending with the sound of the rain. For a few minutes the war receded, and the soldier felt something close to peace. When silence fell again, he held on to that memory, carrying it like a flame against the darkness. The campaign dragged deeper into the interior, and the soldier began to feel as though the jungle had no end. Every ridge conquered revealed another beyond. Every valley crossed led only to more tangled green. Progress was measured not in miles, but in exhaustion. How many men could still stand at the end of the day? How many rifles were carried forward? The soldier's body had grown wiry, his face hollow, but his will hardened with each march. He no longer thought of weeks or months. He thought only of the next sunrise, the next step. The Japanese struck again near a river crossing. Hidden machine guns opened fire as the men waded through waist-deep water, bullets snapping across the surface. Chaos erupted instantly. Shouts, splashes, the smell of gunpowder heavy in the damp air. The soldier pushed forward, heart hammering, firing into the tree line even as water dragged at his legs. By some miracle, his unit reached the far bank, driving the enemy back after a brutal clash. When silence returned, the river flowed on as though nothing had happened, carrying away blood and debris alike. That night, camp was heavy with grief. They had lost more comrades, men whose voices had filled the air with laughter only a day earlier. The soldier sat with others around a dim fire, listening to the silence between words. No one spoke of victory. They spoke only of the names of those gone, whispering them like prayers against the dark. Hunger pressed harder than ever. Supplies had dwindled to almost nothing, and men grew gaunt, their ribs stark beneath thin uniforms. The soldier dreamed of food nightly, vivid images of bread, meat, steaming tea. Waking was cruel, his stomach hollow, but he forced himself onward. He learned that hope itself could be a form of sustenance, though fragile. Sickness stalked them, relentless. Malaria struck again, leaving men pale and trembling. Some recovered slowly, others slipped away quietly. The soldier feared his own body might betray him, but he clung stubbornly to each day, determined not to fall. And yet, amid misery, sparks of life endured. One evening, as rain softened to drizzle, a comrade produced a small tin of jam saved for months. He shared it spoonful by spoonful, and the sweetness brought tears to weary eyes. The soldier tasted it slowly, savouring every drop, the memory of home flooding back. It reminded him that the world beyond Burma still existed, still waited. That thought, more than orders, gave him strength to shoulder his pack again. The soldier found that exhaustion no longer came in waves, but lived inside him constantly, a steady weight pressing against every step. Sleep brought little relief. It was broken by rain, by insects, by sudden shouts in the dark. Even in dreams the jungle followed him, its vines and shadows creeping into his mind. Yet he rose each morning because there was no alternative. To stop was to fall behind, and to fall behind was to vanish into the green silence forever. The unit pushed into thicker jungle now, where light rarely reached the floor. Days passed in dim twilight beneath towering trees, the air thick with mist and decay. The soldier often felt as though he were marching through a world beneath the world, cut off from the sky itself. He longed for open fields, for sunlight, for the sight of horizon, but Burma offered none of these. Instead, it closed tighter, wrapping around them like a cage. Ambushes haunted every step. Japanese soldiers appeared suddenly, their camouflage blending perfectly with the land. Shots cracked, grenades burst, shouts echoed in chaos. The soldier fought automatically, rifle steady though his heart thundered. Fear never left, but discipline carried him. When silence returned, bodies lay scattered, and the jungle reclaimed the ground quickly, as if swallowing the evidence. The soldier wrote again in his notebook that night, recording the faces of those lost. He knew the pages might not survive the rain, but he wrote anyway, determined that memory would outlast the jungle's silence. Hunger deepened further. Rations shrank until they were barely enough to keep men standing. Some chewed on raw roots, others caught insects to roast briefly over fire. The soldier forced himself to eat whatever was offered, his stomach tight with emptiness. Yet even in hunger, men shared. A crust of bread divided into pieces, a cigarette passed from hand to hand. Such acts kept despair at bay. Sickness pressed close again. Malaria struck with fever and chills, leaving men trembling through the night. Dysentery spread, weakening bodies further. The soldier feared each bite of food, each sip of water, yet he had no choice but to endure. Through it all, bonds deepened. Comrades leaned on one another, carrying packs for the weak, whispering encouragement when strength faltered. The soldier realized that survival here was not an individual act, but a collective one. Alone, none could endure. Together they pushed forward, mile by mile through a land that seemed determined to consume them. And still, despite everything, he marched. By this stage of the campaign, the soldier felt transformed into someone he hardly recognised. The young man from Manchester, full of vague notions of honour and adventure, had been worn away by rain, hunger, and fear. What remained was lean, hardened, and quiet. He did not dream of medals or victory anymore. He dreamed of dry clothes, of bread, of lying down without being woken by insects or gunfire. Yet even stripped of illusions he endured, because endurance itself had become his purpose. The jungle seemed endless, yet rumours reached them that larger offensives were underway, that the Allies were pressing deeper into Burma to turn the tide. The soldier heard these whispers with cautious hope, though he had learned not to trust promises. Each mile still had to be marched, each ridge still had to be taken. Hope was fragile in Burma, but it was necessary. Without it, men might collapse into despair. Skirmishes continued with cruel regularity. Sometimes they lasted only minutes, a burst of gunfire from the trees, then silence. Other times they dragged on for hours, smoke and chaos choking the air until no one could tell where the line was. The soldier fought automatically, his training and instinct guiding him more than thought. Afterward he felt hollow, staring at the ground littered with shells and shattered branches. Survival brought relief, but never joy. Hunger became a constant ache, sharper now as supplies dwindled further. Meals shrank to little more than scraps. The soldier chewed slowly, stretching every bite, forcing himself to believe it would be enough. Dreams of food haunted him more than dreams of combat. He wrote about them in his notebook, lists of meals, recipes remembered from home, flavours he longed for. It gave him something to hold on to, even if only in imagination. Sickness remained a shadow. Men fell daily, some recovering slowly, others fading despite the care of comrades. The soldier feared fever more than bullets now. He watched strong men wither in days, their eyes dimming, their voices fading. Yet the unit pressed on, carrying the sick when possible, leaving graves when not. Bonds among survivors deepened beyond words. A shared glance, a steadying hand, a whispered joke. These gestures carried more weight than orders from any officer. They were the reason men rose each morning. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, the soldier sat with a comrade and spoke of nothing but silence, letting the stillness say what words could not. In that quiet, he understood that the war in Burma was not only about defeating an enemy, it was about preserving humanity in a place designed to strip it away. And as long as they carried that humanity forward, step by weary step, the jungle could not fully claim them. The soldier's world had narrowed to essentials: rifle, pack, boots, and the men beside him. Everything else had been stripped away by the months of marching and fighting. Yet in that narrowing, he found clarity. Life was reduced to survival, and survival meant focusing only on the next step, the next meal, the next sunrise. He had stopped asking when the war would end. Instead, he asked only if he could keep going one more day. In that question lay both despair and strength. Orders carried them further into Burma's interior. Valleys opened into swamps, where men slogged knee-deep in foul water, each step a battle against suction and fatigue. Leeches thrived here, clinging silently until discovered, their bites leaving trails of blood. The soldier grew used to brushing them away, though he never stopped feeling the chill of disgust each time. He wondered how such creatures could exist in such numbers, feeding endlessly on exhausted men. Yet the column pushed through, because to stop was worse. Ambushes came again, sudden and violent. The Japanese struck with precision, then vanished into the trees. The soldier fired until his rifle grew hot, ears ringing with the sound of shots. When silence fell, the aftermath was always the same. Bodies carried, shallow graves dug, silence heavier than words. He no longer tried to count losses. They blurred together. part of the rhythm of war. Hunger hollowed them all. Rations had become almost symbolic. Small handfuls of rice, dry biscuits crumbling into dust. The soldier chewed slowly, swallowing bitterness with each bite. He dreamed of food constantly, even awake. Once, a comrade described roast beef from home, and the soldier nearly wept at the memory of its smell. These longings were cruel, yet they reminded them that another world still existed, far from mud and rain. Sickness stalked them too. Malaria struck again, fevers spreading like fire through camp. The soldier feared each mosquito bite, yet he had no power to stop them. He swallowed quinine when he could, the bitter taste clinging to his mouth, but supplies were never enough. Death crept silently, often in the night. Graves filled quickly, names whispered, memories fading under vines. Yet through loss, bonds deepened. Men leaned on one another, shared what little they had, whispered encouragement when strength faltered. The soldier realized that survival was not only physical but emotional. Without these bonds, men would break. One evening, as mist curled through the trees, a comrade began humming a tune. Others joined softly, voices weaving together until camp filled with fragile harmony. The soldier closed his eyes, letting the sound carry him far away. For a moment, Burma disappeared. What remained was only the proof that humanity, though battered, still endured. The soldier had long stopped believing that Burma could ever truly be conquered. The land itself resisted them, a constant enemy as formidable as the Japanese. Yet he kept moving, because movement was survival. Every mile gained was proof that he still endured, even if the cost was measured in exhaustion, hunger, and loss. By now, the men were shadows of themselves, thin, hollow-eyed, their uniforms in tatters. Yet in their silence, in the way they rose each morning without complaint, there was a quiet strength no one could take from them. The campaign carried them toward another ridge, one more obstacle in a series that seemed endless. The climb was brutal, mud slick beneath their boots, packs dragging them backward. Rain poured steadily, soaking rifles making each step treacherous. At the top, gunfire erupted, the Japanese entrenched and waiting. Chaos followed. Shouts, smoke, grenades bursting against rocks. The soldier pressed forward, his body moving almost by instinct, his rifle steady despite trembling hands. Hours blurred into a haze of noise and fear. When silence returned, the ridge was theirs, but at a terrible cost. They buried comrades quickly, rain pattering on fresh earth. No one spoke. Words felt meaningless. That night, the soldier sat apart, staring into mist. He thought of how many names he had whispered into the dark, how many faces had vanished. He feared that memory itself would fail, that one day he would not recall the laughter, the voices, the humanity of those gone. To resist that erasure, he wrote in his notebook again, though pages were nearly ruined by damp. He listed names, fragments of stories, details small but precious. It was all he could do to keep them alive. Hunger gnawed deeper than ever. Rations had nearly collapsed, and men scavenged roots, leaves, anything that might fill their stomachs. The soldier forced down bitter plants, his stomach rebelling, but necessity overruled taste. Dreams of food haunted him, sharper than dreams of battle. Sickness lingered too. Malaria struck once more, leaving men trembling under thin blankets, skin clammy with fever. The soldier feared it constantly, knowing it might come for him next. Yet he rose each morning, pushed forward with the others, because there was no alternative. Amid despair, bonds held them together. A comrade shared the last of his cigarette. Another told a half-forgotten story that drew tired laughter. In such moments the soldier felt a flicker of hope. Not hope of glory or triumph, but hope of simply surviving, of living long enough to see Burma's war end. And that fragile hope, though small, was enough to carry him one step further into the endless green. The final weeks in Burma blurred into one long march, a stretch of exhaustion that seemed to have no end. The soldier felt as though he had been walking forever, his world reduced to mud beneath his boots and the weight of his rifle in tired hands. Yet whispers spread through the ranks, rumours that the campaign was turning, that the Japanese were retreating, that perhaps their ordeal was nearing its close. The soldier dared not believe fully, but the thought gave his weary body one last reserve of strength. Each dawn came heavy with mist, the jungle glistening with rain, the air thick with damp earth and decay. The soldier rose automatically, shouldered his pack, and followed the column into the green maze. He no longer counted miles or days. He measured survival in steps, each one proof that he was still alive. Battles still flared. One last ambush erupted near a swollen river, gunfire rattling through the trees. The soldier dove for cover, firing into shadows as chaos swallowed the trail. When it ended, silence returned swiftly as always. The unit buried their dead, whispered names, and pressed onward. The soldier felt hollow, yet determined. He knew that grief had to be carried forward just like his pack, heavy but unavoidable. Hunger stalked them until the very end. Rations were almost gone, men reduced to skin and bone. The soldier chewed slowly on scraps, his stomach always empty, his body weak. Yet he forced himself onward, because stopping meant surrender. Sickness lingered too, but he managed to resist its grip, though he feared every feverish chill, every shiver at night. What saved him, more than medicine, was the bond with the men around him. They endured together, and that unity gave them strength that no jungle could strip away. At last, the day came when orders shifted. The push was ending. Relief units were moving in. The soldier could hardly believe it at first. After so many months of endless marches, sudden ambushes and silent burials, the thought that he might finally leave the jungle felt unreal. When they emerged from the trees into a clearing where supply convoys waited, the soldier stopped and stared at the open sky. For the first time in months, he felt air that was not pressed down by vines or mist. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, letting the sun touch his face. Around him, comrades stood quietly, too weary to cheer, but their silence held more meaning than shouts ever could. The campaign was not won in glory but in survival. The soldier understood that he would carry Burma with him forever. The rain, the hunger, the fear, the bond of men who endured. He had entered the jungle as one person and left as another, reshaped by hardship. Yet above all, he had learned that true courage was not loud or celebrated. It was the quiet act of rising each morning, taking another step and refusing to give in. And with that lesson, he finally walked away from the jungle war, alive.